Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this episode of Cut the Crop. And today we're talking to a well-known FAR staff member, Ivan Lawrie. Hi Ivan, welcome.
Hi Alison.
Yep, and we're going to be talking about fall armyworm. And biosecurity, is always on FAR's, top priority list, and fall armyworm has been, a pest that we have recognised as having the potential to cause serious problems if it arrived in New Zealand. And of course, lo and behold, a couple of months ago, it did arrive. So not surprisingly, we think it's important to be able to just talk about what we've been doing in this space and making you aware of the likely outcomes from this incursion. So let's start off, Ivan, by just talking about, I suppose, what fall armyworm is and why it was always on our list of, pest risks.
Yeah, so fall armyworm is a lepidopteran insect which originates from the tropical and subtropical regions of America, north and south, has spread significantly over the last decade to other regions of the world. Most of those regions in the world are regions with land masses that cover tropical and subtropical regions, such as Africa, Southern Asia, and more recently Australia in the last 2 years. It is a pest that is primarily attracted to C4 grass-type plants such as maize and sorghum, but in the absence of those crops, it will attack other species as well. So it has been known to be a pest of soybeans and other crops as well. So it's not exclusive to that, but it does have a preference for C4 crops.
So what about cereals? Or is it a worry for New Zealand with respect to cereals? I mean, obviously maize, yes, and sweet corn, yes, but what about cereals?
Potentially, it will go for what is around. Now, the name of the pest kind of says it all. The fall armyworm side of it means that it's a late summer occurring pest. In its translation into other languages, it's actually described as late armyworm rather than fall armyworm. So the likelihood of it attacking other species, it's really dependent on what's green and available at the time.
So it's the larval stage that is eating the leaves.
It's the larval stage that is eating the leaves. It is the winged stage that promotes dispersal and distribution of the pest.
Okay, so when did it arrive in New Zealand, and what do we know about its distribution?
So the first appearance of it was in mid-March, where a cluster of eggs was found on a trap near Tauranga, and that was identified quite quickly as being fall armyworm. Within a week or so, we had the appearance of the first worm actually on farm in the vicinities of Hamilton, and that quickly raised the alert levels, whereby we started a campaign to promote the fact that this was out there and promoting the fact that we needed to get reports from farmers or agents if they saw anything suspicious. Now, in saying that, for the main crop maize, silage crops were mostly gone by then. There were still the maize grain crops standing, and there were some vulnerable crops of sweet corn, which was still vulnerable to the pest. The pest was actually found on volunteer maize growing in stubble or in paddocks that had been turned over to grow grass over winter.
So how widespread is it? I mean, how widespread have those detections been?
So as at last week, so this is, end of June, we have received 24 confirmed reports of fall armyworm, ranging from Taranaki in the west to Gisborne in the east, and as far north as the extreme north of New Zealand. So it's a reasonably widespread distribution, with obviously where most of that volunteer maize and corn crops have been around Waikato area, South Auckland areas, is where we got the major number of reports.
And so do we have any idea of how it got to New Zealand?
The evidence suggests, and the experts think, that the only way it could have arrived was through cyclonic weather events, so basically transported via wind from Australia.
Yeah. And I mean, I know there's been a lot of discussions around, will fall armyworm persist and overwinter in New Zealand? Tell us a little bit about, what our thoughts are around its likely establishment.
So we're lucky in New Zealand to have had the help of experts. I mean, we've had entomologists in New Zealand who have been looking at fall armyworm for years, and some of them working with the pest overseas, such as Graham Walker and others. We've asked Better Border Bioprotection, B3, or biosecurity, always get it wrong, but B3, that group, to bring some expert opinion into it and work on some modeling for us. And the modeling suggests that there is a possibility that this pest could overwinter in the extreme north of New Zealand. I guess, like in anything, models are not 100% certain. The proof will be this spring whether we start finding individual insects popping up over that region. The key to all of this is to have a very good trap planning session and make sure that in spring we've got pheromone traps well distributed throughout the northern region to detect any findings. So this is something that is already underway in the planning.
Yeah. So maybe it might be good, because obviously the growers know that we signed up to the GIA, the Government Industry Agreement for Biosecurity Readiness and Response. And so we've been brought in to this incursion in the form of Seed and Grain Readiness and Response, SGRR, which is the partnership that we created, with the growers and the flour millers and the seed companies to respond to arable-related incursions. So how has all of that sort of played out? How have we been involved in this incursion and the response?
So, yeah, we've been involved. I think the main thing about GIA is that it does involve industry at a very early stage in an incursion. So we've been brought round the table by MPI and being kept informed of everything that's been happening. And that includes the very early detection of the eggs in mid-March, and then, of course, later on the rollout of finding the actual worms. The way GIA operates, as you say, it's a partnership between MPI and the different industry sectors, but it can, in the case of certain pests and diseases or weeds that are detected in New Zealand, it might involve more than one sector. So in this case, the plant sectors were readily consulted, as well as some of the potentially affected livestock sectors. It has been determined at this stage that the beneficiaries of this response would primarily be the plant-based sectors, although there are indirect impacts on livestock sector as well, and this is a subject for discussion. But the splits at this stage are being worked on. It is understood that the main affected parties would be the arable industry through our maize growers and our maize industry, and also the processed vegetable industry through the sweet corn producers. Those are the two crops that are more understood worldwide to have severe economic damage from this pest.
And so just to remind growers that signing up to the GIA with this relationship between industry and the government via MPI, that means that we are going to share in the costs associated with responding to this incursion. So do you want to just talk about the fact that that we will have a biosecurity levy associated with any incursion that is relevant to arable?
Yeah, that is correct. So the costs of any incursion that affect our sector are obviously shared with MPI, but that there is a cost associated to the response that will fall upon our growers, and that will trigger the enaction of a biosecurity levy. Now, before people get too scared about this or about the amounts that might be involved, there is a cap to this levy that ensures that it won't be more than 1% of the value of the crop in any given year. And also there is a payback period that we can spread the cost in terms of returning that money back to MPI for the cost. So we will always make it as light as possible for growers to be able to respond.
But the important thing is that we're round the table with the government making and contributing to the decisions that are made, so that we're not going to be, having to just accept decisions that are made by the government, that we're actually part of the decision making.
Absolutely. We are involved in the decision making. There are weekly and sometimes twice weekly meetings on this, which, might seem sometimes excessive. However, they're really important, and it's much better to be around the table than not to be participating in these decisions. And these decisions also involved stop-go decisions around what are the economic benefits of actually doing these responses, because in some cases it might be decided that the cost of enacting a response might be more than the actual damage than the potential pest can produce. So all of these things get discussed around the table. In any event, the default position is always that MPI will cover at least 50% of the cost. And then there are sometimes attenuating factors that mean that the cost share might sometimes be 60-40, 70-30, or whatever is determined based on the impacts either to the private sector or if there's public interest in these pests to be removed.
So what's the plan then for this coming season?
So I think the main aspects are, as winter sets in, obviously we're not getting the reports, and we don't expect to get them. This pest, the activity and the cycles diminish enormously once you start getting temperatures below 10 degrees. So we will be observing closely, but expect that this will be quieter period over winter and into early spring. The plan for next season, and we're working on it now, is to have an ample distribution of traps set around key strategic areas where we think that we might detect the pest. Those traps will be monitored and captured that information carefully to quickly determine what might happen. So there's a series of options here. Basically four. One of them is we don't find anything. That might mean if there's no detections and no reports that actually fall armyworm has not survived the winter in New Zealand. There's also the option that we might find it, but only in one region and limited, say, to the very north of New Zealand, in which case we might still be in a position to control it in that particular region. The option is that we find it widespread throughout New Zealand and in the North Island all over the place. In that case, we would have to reconsider whether a response is feasible or not, because if you have widespread distribution, you might have to learn to live with it and go into long-term management. And the fourth option is we might have another incursion. If through another weather event, might have another isolated incursion coming in from Australia. So these are the 4 scenarios that we've so far looked at. The key is in the trapping and the key is in the reporting. And to any growers, even though we're heading into winter, if you do find anything that is even remotely suspicious of being a fall armyworm, there are other lookalikes. Don't be scared to come forward. Please report it into MPI. That is the correct pathway, is to get all our records in one place and get onto the MPI hotline and report it. That is the way we will find out whether this pest is actually in New Zealand for the long term or not.
Yeah. And I mean, we have been putting out, grower, guides to fall armyworm, and we do, have regular sort of updates in FAR Weekly. So, growers, if they're a little bit unsure about what this is all about, there are lots of resources that FAR has available.
Absolutely. So we're getting the regular situation reports out, which has the map with the dots on it where the worm has been detected, and there is also guides on how to manage it if you find it. As I say, that will be more prevalent into next summer than it is over winter. There is not a lot of activity that can be conducted right now.
So it's very much of, keeping your eyes sort of focused on what's happening in the, next summer, and I guess keeping our fingers crossed that it's an outcome that is on the more favourable side for our growers.
Hopefully so, Alison. That's what we're all hoping, but we're, I think, reasonably well prepared and have done everything possible to get into spring in a position where we can do the necessary fines.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Ivan. And thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.